Hello, we are group number 5 for marketing sustainability, and we say no to prison labor. We are Wilma Neeson, Thomas Ponce, Marley Seat, Ollie Hancock, Parisa Burke, and me, Iona Gessner. So, what is prison labor, first of all? Prison labor is work that inmates do during their time in prison as another punishment for their crime, and that's actually as how it's described in the except clause of the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment, as you will recall, is the amendment that abolished slavery in the US. And the exception for this prison labor is something that many people view today as another version of slavery. Prison labor is allowed in all 50 states, and many actually have it as a mandatory practice for their inmates. Some states pay their inmates while they do it, and the other states give them absolutely nothing, but most prisoners earn much less than even $1 an hour while they're working. These tasks that they do include things like cooking, laundry, mail delivery, and more. And actually, one horrifying fact that we want to highlight to really show why this is viewed as modern day slavery is that there are things called cotton production prisons where the inmates have to tend to and harvest cotton fields much like slaves did before the 13th Amendment was abolished. And it really just highlights how and why this is viewed as modern day slavery. Now, I'm going to pass it off to our first argument.
Imagine working 8 hours a day in a factory. You're paid less than $1 an hour or nothing at all. You can't choose your job, and refusing to work results in punishment. This is the reality for many incarcerated workers in the United States. And from an ethical standpoint, this is deeply wrong. Internationally, the United States has committed to uphold the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was affirmed by the U.S. Department of State. Under Article 4 of the UDHR, no one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all forms. And under Article 23, everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work. Everyone has the right to form and to join trade unions for the protection of his interest. The U.S. prison system directly violates these human rights because incarcerated workers don't have the freedom to choose their employment. According to the Bureau of Justice, 83% of federal and 71% of state prisoners who had a work assignment in 2016 reported being required to work. Moreover, the ACLU 22 report revealed that 76% of incarcerated workers reported being forced to work under threat of punishment, including solitary confinement, loss of family visitation, or commissary privileges. Additionally, these workers are paid far below fair labor standards. The same report found that incarcerated workers are typically paid between 13 and 52 cents per hour, and some state they're paid nothing at all. In contrast, the federal minimum wage in the United States is $7.25 per hour. Furthermore, incarcerated individuals are also denied the right to unionize, which strips them away from essential labor protections. While technically it's legal under domestic law, the U.S. prison labor system is incompatible with the international human rights standards. It constitutes forced labor, undermines the principle of free and fair work. It denies the incarcerated people their basic labor rights. The U.S., as a global advocate for human rights, must reconcile its domestic policy with international commitments.
Discussing prison labor environment, there are a multitude of different concerns regarding ethical and both human rights violations. First, we see evidence of coerced labor, where workers operate under a very militant structure, facing harsh punishments for failing to meet impossible standards. And many of these workers are forced to endure extensive hours, often with little to no choice of alternatives. Second, many workers face limited access to basic necessities. This includes unlivable wages that do not support even the most essential needs, and a lack of basic self-care supplies, such as hygiene products or common medical items. Lastly, the work conditions are unsafe and inhumane, and the labor is often carried out in unsanitary environments, and workers are routinely exposed to toxins, conditions that would never be tolerated outside of these settings. These practices clearly violate both ethical standards and basic human rights, and addressing them is a top priority in any reform conversation.
Next, we're going to be moving on to argument 3, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the racial injustice side of things and why this makes prison labor ultimately a big no for our team. Starting off with the general fact that the United States has the most prisoners of any country with well over 2 million, but when we break this population down a little bit further, we'll see 13% of the United States population is African American, yet they account for 38.4% of people who are behind bars, and we ask ourselves, why is this? Well, this is why. Individuals from low-income, under-resourced communities frequently become entangled with criminal justice systems because of over-policing in those areas, their limited access to legal resources, and other various types of biases. And then once these people get imprisoned, they are directed into these awful labor programs that pay very little or sometimes nothing at all, as we've gone over in the last couple arguments. And they are often working for major corporations or state agencies, which just adds to the power imbalance. And this process makes a profit from punishing people who are already disadvantaged in this unequal societal structure. And this turns structure-based inequality into profits, which is just not okay. As prison labor generally does not generate transferable skills into the outside world after you're incarcerated, the returning individuals only have access to limited job opportunities since they were only given a limited opportunity in the prison in whatever jobs they may be working there for very small amounts of money. On top of this, many individuals also face restrictions for voting, housing, and public assistance upon release, which keeps individuals in states of economic marginalization and disenfranchisement, largely in Black and Latino communities, which ultimately is not fair and does not lead to a very ethical and sustainable society.
Some people argue that prison labor is beneficial because it helps incarcerated individuals gain job skills for life after release. While that sounds positive in theory, the reality is very different. Most prison jobs are repetitive, low-skill tasks like sewing uniforms or assembling products that don't translate to real opportunities outside. And even if someone does gain experience, they still face huge obstacles once they're released, like employment discrimination and legal barriers in certain industries. So instead of being a true path to rehabilitation, prison labor often just reinforces inequality and makes it harder for people to rebuild their lives.
The second counter-argument we've identified is that prison labor will reduce stress and boredom for inmates. However, after further research, multiple articles claim that prison labor is a modern form of slavery, as workers, or in this case prisoners, are forced to work extremely long hours under hard conditions and barely earn any money, in some cases earning less than 4 cents an hour. With our third counter-argument, which is prison labor primarily benefits prisons and its residents, following along with our last point that it's the modern version of slavery. This is because slavery was outlawed, thus except when being fit for punishment of a crime. This has turned many prisons to over-abuse prison labor, and in many cases pay nothing to the prisoners that complete the work in order to attempt to stay within their budgets.
In closing, our group stands firmly against the use of prison labor. Through research, we have found that many incarcerated people face unsafe working conditions and are paid very little, or nothing at all. Because of this, we will continue to stand for those impacted by the prison labor system. Thank you.